Some history shows merely scratch the surface.
It's one small step for man.
We go a little deeper.
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
This is Deep into History. How deep do you want to go?
Deep into History is independent and proudly listener-supported. Before we begin, I would like to thank my newest patrons who went to patreon.com/deepintohistory and pledged their support. You can also do so directly on Spotify and soon on Apple Podcasts. So, Wendy and Tom, my new historians, I salute you and thank you from the center of my being. This is Deep into History, and I'm your host, Arjun Hundal. Today we're going to experience an epic battle, perhaps the most famous last stand in history. And in order to do that battle justice, we'll need to explore and consider the reasons it took place. In the case of our battle to be, it is impossible to understand without first exploring another battle that took place a decade before it. Thus, the setup to our setup goes like this. It is the 5th century before the Common Era. Greece is not a country, but a collection of constantly warring city-states. Athens and Sparta have emerged as the two most dominant cities, always rivals, rarely allies. During the previous century, in the east, rising like the sun, a union between two tribes, the Medes and the Persians in modern Iran, have allowed them to expand their territory and become the dominant force in the region. Excelling in light and quick warfare, they conquer land after land and eventually destroy Lydia, the country of King Croesus, the richest man to have ever lived.
Show me the money.
Through conquest, they subjugate Egypt and the dozens of Greek cities along the coast of Asia Minor, becoming the Persian Empire. They rule justly and provide security from invasion. However, their taxes are high, and some of their governors, called satraps, abuse their power. This abuse causes the Greeks of Ionia, the coast of modern Turkey, to revolt. These cities beg for help from the Greeks of the mainland. Athens and their ally, the island city of Eretria, respond by sending a small force to aid the rebels. The result is chaos, and the rebellion is brutally suppressed. Enraged by their support of the rebels, the Persian king of kings, Darius, orders an invasion of Greece to punish Athens. He vows to burn the city and its temples to the ground. He orders the construction of a colossal fleet of ships to form a navy to dominate the Mediterranean world, and moves his vast army to the distant coast to conquer the land of the Hellenes. One by one, the Greek island nations of the Aegean Sea are subjugated, and the Persian fleet gains near complete naval dominance. Compared to the might of the Persian Empire, the small city-state of Athens and its few allies look to be in a hopeless situation. If King Darius could land his entire army, they would be outnumbered 10-1. In desperation, Athens sends a messenger to the powerful warrior society in southwest Greece, a place called Lacedaemon, for there dwelt the Spartans, who, fanatically loyal to the Lycurgan Code, are the only warriors who could hope to stand against the coming Persian tide. The messenger covered the 150 miles to Sparta in 2 days, delivered his city's plea for aid, and then ran back. The Spartans were moved by his eloquent words, but they refused to march until the end of a religious festival a few days later, and it would take at least another week for the Spartan army to make the march. So it was that on September 10th, 490 before the Common Era, the Athenians met half the Persian army by the sea, on the plain of Marathon, without the Spartans. 9,000 Athenian hoplites, reinforced by 1,000 allies from the small city-state of Plataea, marched on the Persian beachhead outnumbered 4-1. In an epic clash, the bronze-armored hoplites routed King Darius' army and pushed them into the sea. It is said that when the Athenians charged the Persians, their enemies felt an unreasonable sense of fear, given how badly they outnumbered the Greeks, that when they were pressed in battle, their lines became disorganized. Finally, when fleeing to their ships, they ran in utter, indescribable terror, panic. For you see, on that epic run between Athens and Sparta, their messenger, Phidippides, met a stranger, who informed him that he stood with Athens. Upon his return to Marathon, When the messenger told the Athenians of this ever so strange encounter, they believed him because he swore by all the gods that it happened. A terrible oath if you were telling a lie. After the battle, they constructed a costly shrine at the foot of the Acropolis to commemorate this strange meeting. This tale is so often overlooked, but is just as crucial as the battle itself. For to the people living then, the gods are real, a part of their daily lives. So come dream with me as we become one with Pheidippides on his epic journey somewhere near the rocky isthmus of Corinth, and his little-known encounter with the Lord of Olympus. An encounter that explained to the Athenians, at least, why they didn't, in the end, require aid from Sparta at the desperate Battle of Marathon. Ready? Then let's go. You are running at a pace you had never thought yourself capable of maintaining. For you are not running for your own life. You are running for the lives of everyone you have ever known. Your friends, your family, strangers you pass in the streets. You are running to save your entire city from annihilation. Sweat pours from your body, and though you're only halfway through your journey, you feel exhausted. While still moving, you massage the newborn cramp under your right ribs. Oh! It's becoming painful. You focus on your breathing. The burning welts on your left leg from your empty water skin slapping against it serve as a mocking reminder that you should have stopped at the last stream you passed to refill it. As you continue the grueling pace, you search your memory and recall that there is a stream just out of sight, just past the next bend on the rocky trail. You keep running, desperately trying not to think about what would happen if you failed in your mission. The uneven, unpaved, and rock-strewn path requires you to move side to side. In places, 2 steps for every one you take forward. In the rocky interior of Greece, a galloping horse would surely break a leg, which is why when a message absolutely had to reach another city fast, Athens called on you. As a boy, you had excelled at running in the countryside around the city, and an elderly courier had noticed this and taken you under his wing and taught you his trade. This courier mission, however, was proving to be your ultimate test. As you round the bend, you allow yourself to imagine the cool, sweet, refreshing, and clear water of the mountain stream touching your tongue and flowing down your throat. It's only a few dozen paces away, and despite your runner's discipline, you sprint, only to finally round the bend and find nothing. In place of the cool mountain stream, there is a dry and parched riverbed. With despair, you realize that the stream must be seasonal. Slowing from the ruinous sprint, but maintaining your original fast and steady pace. In desperation, you search your mind for the next river along this route, and you are filled with horror as you realize it is many miles away. You also realize you could die of thirst before you reach it. With no other choice, you press on. You notice that the sweat pouring from you only an hour ago has now slowed to a trickle as your body strives to retain every drop of moisture. The heat from your body is radiating off you in waves, and you are beginning to feel feverish. You say a prayer. In fact, a desperate plea to all the gods on Olympus to aid you and your city in this, your most desperate hour. And though not spoken aloud, they are the most profound words you have ever said. To take your mind off your predicament, you scan the countryside for any sign of robbers or escaped Spartan helots, slaves, who in their desperation could be dangerous in the extreme for a lone traveler. You see nothing but rocky gray-green hills and clear blue sky to your left. You turn your head to the right, and there is nothing but the barren of water, the relatively lush foothills of the coming mountain range. It seems that the only place you will find water is over the mountains, where streams fed from their snow-capped peaks continually flow, which means you would have to go without water for another 25 miles. Again, with no other choice, you push on. As you begin your grueling ascent into the mountains, you ignore your thirst and cramping sides by reciting the message you committed to memory before you left Athens.
Men of Sparta, the Athenians ask you to help them, and not stand by while the most ancient city of Greece is crushed and subdued by a foreign invader.
For even now, Eretria has been enslaved, and Greece is weaker by the loss of one fine city. The thought of beautiful and cultured Eretria burned to the ground, its people killed or sold into slavery. All the temples, priceless art, the little shrines, the children, causes a tear to fall from your left eye, moisture you can't afford to lose. As it quickly flows down your face and drops from your chin, you try to grasp it. Too late, your hand reaches out as the precious water passes through your fingers and hits the dry path. You stop running and drop to your knees, desperate to save even the merest hint of water. In despair and madness, you begin to claw at the tawny dark spot on the ground and are shaken by the sound of a voice coming from just behind you.
I wept for the fall of beautiful Eretria as well.
Without thinking, you draw your dagger from your belt and turn to confront. You are met by a truly strange sight. The man behind you is naked. His nearly bronze skin glistens as if it had just been bathed and oiled. His blonde hair is intricately braided to look like the horns of a ram. His eyes are green, but somehow beyond that. For a moment you become lost in them, and it's as if you can see green leaves gently buffeted by a cool breeze. You suddenly feel as if your soul is being pulled out of your body and drawn into the tranquil oasis held within the depths of his eyes. You blink and draw yourself back. The sudden motion causes you to fall on your bottom on the dry path. The man takes a step towards you, a sad smile on his face, his impossibly flawless face. His skin is like silk, and his blonde beard seems to shimmer with highlights of green, surely a trick of the sunlight. Your eyes widen, and you push yourself further away as you see his impossibly large member swaying between his legs.
Hail and well met, Phidippides,
He says, offering you his hand to help you rise. You take it, and he lifts you to your feet as if you were weightless. Once on your feet, you quickly withdraw your hand as it tingles, as if you had just touched something charged with Zeus's lightning. The strange man before you tilts his head as if curious about your reaction to his presence. He then asks,
why has Athens forgotten me?
"Who?" you start to say, but are racked by a dry cough from your parched throat.
Of course, forgive me, my friend. Your run must have been exhausting. Why don't you drink from your water skin?
He says, pointing at your belt. "It's empty," you say, your hoarse voice just above a whisper. He looks at you quizzically.
Are you quite sure of that?
You look down at your belt, and impossibly your water skin, that was most definitely empty, is inexplicably full. The beaded condensation of cool water permeates its membrane, and you can feel them penetrate your clothes and cool the skin beneath. In disbelief, you reach down and fumble to undo the knot with which the skin is tied to your belt. Your fingers feel weak, and your hands cramp, quickly followed by the muscles in your left leg. Once again, you collapse to the ground and gasp in pain and anguish, for your body is telling you that it can go no further. In that moment, your soul experiences a seizure of its own, for you know you have failed. The Spartans will never hear your plea for aid, and Athens, like Eretria, will burn.
Despair not, my friend. I will help you, but first you must drink.
You look up at the strange man, and standing on the flat palm of his outstretched hand is a magnificent crystal goblet, filled with clear, purplish blue liquid. In your weakened state, you can't seem to determine whether it's the sun reflecting off the flawless crystal, or if the liquid itself is shimmering.
One sip only,
He says as he places the goblet on the ground in front of you. You reach for it with your shaky hands, bringing the glittering crystal to your mouth, and take a deep and long sip and swallow the strange liquid. The sensation that fills you is like nothing you have ever experienced before. Your thirst is gone, your muscles unseized. You are filled with an electric energy, and you feel like you could run for days. It's as if you just drank and absorbed the energy from a bolt of Zeus's lightning. You eagerly try to bring the goblet back to your lips for one more drop, but it's disappeared, gone. You look back up to find the strange man smiling at you.
Ambrosia.
He says, "A drop more and your frail mortal body would be consumed." You rise to your feet effortlessly, Your skin tingles with energy, and you feel as strong as Hercules.
Why have the people of Athens forgotten me?
Your savior asks, "Who are you?" But as soon as you ask the question, you are flooded with realization. His skin, his electric touch, his hair shaped like perfect ram's horns, the ambrosia. "Pan, my lord," you say and drop to one knee before the god.
Up now. Answer my question and be on your way, for your mission is critical.
I don't know. I have often thought of you.
You have, but you also know very few, if any, of your countrymen who regularly honor this denizen of Olympus. Tell the people of Athens that I am with them. They will feel my presence on the battlefield. Tell them to remember me.
He offers you his hand, which you take, and when you rise, he is gone. There is no sign of him, no footprints, nothing, except the slight electric tingle in the palm of your hand. You shake your head, and then remembering your mission, you turn towards Sparta and run. You run like you never have before, like you never could have before. You feel limitless energy, as if you could run forever. And as you make your mad dash through the mountains, you can hear a flute playing in the distance. Let the running courier fade away. Allow the magic of that unworldly meeting to pass. Come back to deep into history and hear me say, "This is the tale of few against many. The tale of a son desperate to avenge his father's disgrace and become the most famous king of his illustrious lineage by burning the cities that dared defy their divine will. The tale of a royal boy, never meant to rule, who ascends to the throne and becomes the warrior king of Sparta. The tale of how that king would die to fulfill a prophecy so that his city could live on. The saga of how a few divided cities united to confront the greatest empire the world had ever known. The epic tale of Leonidas and his 300 bodyguards, and how this small band of warriors became known as the Shield of the West. So take a deep breath, let it out slowly, put some smoke in the air if you choose, and just let your mind flow to my voice as we go deep into the year 480 before the Common Era and experience the Battle of Thermopylae. Welcome to the gates of hell. Phidippides reached Sparta and delivered his city's plea for aid. The Spartans were greatly moved by his words, but they told him that they could not march for days as they were observing the Carnia, a religious festival that forbid them from taking up arms. All Greeks of this age were what we would consider to be pious, but the Spartans were near fanatical in their religious beliefs. Phidippides ran back the 150 miles to the battlefield, only to find that in his absence, the relatively small Athenian force had crushed the Persian army on the plain of Marathon. When he informed them of his strange encounter with the god Pan on his journey, Athenians swore that they felt his presence on the battlefield and witnessed the Persian enemy feel his unique brand of panic. This was not the end of Phidippides' journey, however. He was immediately tasked with running the 26.2 miles to Athens to tell the citizens of the great victory and warn the city that the Persian fleet lurked nearby and would surely attack while the army was away. Phidippides made the run and delivered the warning.
The brothers are coming home arm in arm.
This run from Marathon to Athens is the basis for our modern marathon run.
Coming to drag him across the line and pushing him home for second.
Then, immediately after he delivered his message, Phidippides dropped dead. This was most likely the result of extreme fatigue, or perhaps because he drank of the nectar of the gods.
One sip only.
A death sentence for a mere mortal man. He was honored by the people of Athens forever after, and his sandals were placed in the opulent shrine to the god Pan that the citizens erected on the spot of his death. The Athenian army marched back to the city in the nick of time. When the fast-approaching Persian fleet saw that the walls were manned and the city was ready for battle, with surprise lost, they turned away and sailed for home. Athens celebrated the victory for days, but at the back of every citizen's mind must have come a realization, a cold dread, that the Persians would be back.
Revenge of the Persians.
Little did they know how right they were. For when news of the defeat reached the royal court of Darius the Great in the glorious city of Susa, there was lamentation at the loss of so many noble warriors. The King of Kings made a sacred vow to avenge the loss and swore by the sun god Ahura Mazda.
Sorry, Arjun, I didn't get that.
Ahura Mazda.
Thank you, my noble scribe.
That Athens would be burned to the ground, its famous temples ground into dust, and its people vanquished. However, before he could plan his revenge, perhaps inspired by news of the defeat, Persian-controlled Egypt erupted in a colossal rebellion. This was a disaster of epic proportions, far more serious than dealing with the Greeks. So Darius was forced to put his vengeance on hold and focus all his vast resources on dealing with the rebels. Revenge upon Athens, always in his thoughts. To truly do justice to the events of 480 before the Common Era, I'm going to give you a classic, deep into history, historical nutshell. Greece as we know it does not exist. Centuries after the exploits of Achilles and Hector in the Trojan War at the end of the Age of Heroes, and the subsequent collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, out of the blackness of the First Dark Age, Greece is a collection of hundreds of small city-states, under constant threat from rivals and barbarian invasions from the north. Tribes band together and form polis, cities, most of the size of what we would call a medium-sized town, with populations of 5 to 10,000. There are much bigger polis, some as large as modern cities, and Athens and Sparta are first among them. All cities were initially ruled by tyrants. The name, in most cases, wasn't what it sounds like in modern times. Tyrants were high chieftains, war leaders, and first citizens. Only the larger cities had what we would consider true kings, and many of these were truly tyrannical. The Athenians had some of the worst, so they ousted their tyrant and set up the world's first democracy. It wasn't a democracy in the way we think of it. It was more akin to an oligarchy where only full citizens could vote, and Athenian owls, cash, could sway that vote rather easily. Things were different in the Peloponnese, the peninsula in the southwest, separated from the rest of Greece by the narrow isthmus of Corinth. There, a vastly different society had developed. Coming out of the mists of the Dark Age, 5 villages that shared a fertile river valley, ethnically identical and constantly warring, were brought together by necessity. Much of the rest of the land of Greece was rocky and unsuitable for the growing of crops. Thus the Eurotas Valley was coveted, and there was constant fighting for control of it. So the 5 villages joined together to form one society that would become known as Sparta.
Spartans!
2 noble families could, according to the beliefs of their people, claim descent from Hercules himself, the demigod. These were the Aeaeids and Eurypontids. Thus it was agreed that each would provide one king, and Sparta would be ruled by both. Lost to the mists of time, but most likely somewhere in the 8th century before the Common Era, the near-mythical Spartan Lycurgus went to the oracle at Delphi to ask how Sparta should organize itself in order to thrive. He heeded the wisdom of Apollo, and after his return, he presented the Spartans with an organizational structure for the society that would last for centuries. This is called the Great Retria, an iron code of conduct and law, the Spartan constitution. Lycurgus, forever after known as the lawgiver, organized Spartan society according to 3 virtues.
Number 1.
Equality among all citizens for both sexes.
Number 2.
Military fitness. The entire aim of their society was to produce the greatest warriors in Greece.
And number 3.
Austerity. Spartans rejected gold and silver and the trappings of luxury, as luxury made people soft. Further, Lycurgus formalized the structure of power in Spartan society, with the 2 kings ruling together, the ephors, a council of 20 to 40 elders who together exercised as much power as the kings, along with what could best be described as a small state senate. All of Spartan society was geared towards creating Spartiates, full citizen soldiers. so that no society would dare attack them and they would be able to expand their power. To achieve this, the Spartans created the agoge, a brutal and harsh military academy. At birth, every child was inspected for deformities, and if any were found, the child was left in the wilderness to die of exposure to the elements or by animal attack.
Yikes.
As persons with physical disabilities were seen as unable to contribute, thus a drain on their society. At the age of 7, the boys were taken away from their homes to join the agoge. They were assigned to a communal mess where their families would contribute food and wine to keep the boys fed. These mess halls were assigned for life, and the messmates formed the basis for Spartan military units. The training was extremely difficult. Boys were allowed only 1 cloak a year, which from constant use would quickly tear, so that they would get used to being cold while on campaign as adults. They always ate together at their mess halls, and were only ever fed a vile black stew, thickened with pig's blood, with a hunk of crude and rough bread. The meals were, well, Spartan. This was to encourage the hungry boys to steal food, because it was believed that the act of theft taught the boys critical thinking. If caught, the punishment was always brutal, involving many lashes with a whip. The boys were made to understand that they were not being punished for theft, but because their plan had failed. Also, upon entering the agoge, each boy was assigned a helot, a slave of similar age that would serve as his battle squire for life. These slaves often served as their master's partner in crime, and the bond between them often grew very strong. At age 12, each boy was assigned a mentor from the upper age groups, men of 18 to 20. They would advise the youths on all things and see them through their training. This may have also been a ritualized sexual relationship, though sources differ on this point. Daily training was brutal, involving long runs with no water and very little food. They would lift heavy stones to build muscle, wrestle, and have bare-knuckle boxing matches. They would spend hours training with the hoplon, the heavy 20-pound wooden bronze shield, which gave hoplites their name, and learn to stand, march, and maneuver in the phalanx, the primary battle formation of the Greeks. This involved standing with shields overlapped so that your shield partially covered the man next to you, with at least 8 ranks behind adding their weight to push the formation forward. In their right hand, they carried a 10-foot spear with a long iron spearhead and a butt spike called a lizard sticker in Sparta. A small iron point on the rear end used to strike down at foes trapped under the phalanx. The first 3 rows would stab out at the enemies in front, while the rear ranks held or pushed their comrades forward. It was a very advanced fighting formation for its time, with every Spartan hoplite armored with a bronze chestplate, greaves, wrist guards, and of course the iconic horse-plumed Spartan helmet. Every city in Greece at this time fought in a phalanx, but only Spartan hoplites were trained since boyhood. Other cities had citizens who had other professions and would train as a militia a few times a month. The Spartans were exclusively warriors. They had no other trade, and this resulted in them having the most powerful army in all of Greece. There was equality of the sexes in Sparta, and Spartan girls would run and train with other women. Physical fitness and perfection were their goal, as it was believed that only a strong woman could create strong offspring to serve the city. Now you might be wondering how the Spartans could devote themselves fully to war when there were fields to be tended, buildings to be built, and weapons to be made. The only reason that this was possible was because they had enslaved an entire people. The Messenians, called helots, were a gigantic slave population, by some accounts outnumbering the Spartans 10 to 1. They did all other labor for Spartan society. Even in democratic Athens, at least 50% of the population were slaves. But these were foreigners bought in slave markets. The Spartans had subjugated fellow Greeks, for which they were reviled in the rest of the country. With the huge disparity in numbers, a helot revolt was greatly feared, and a constant problem for the Spartans. Order was maintained through terror by the Kreptia, a Spartan secret police that killed any helot seen breaking the strict curfew, gathering in large groups, or any helot suspected of speaking about rebellion. It was a reign of terror as they became the supreme land power in all of Greece. All the cities of the Peloponnese, with the exceptions of Corinth and their bitter rival Argos, submitted to Spartan hegemony. As we approach the year
480.
Before the Common Era, the cities of mainland Greece are becoming isolated from the rest of the world because of the might of the Persian Empire. The King of Kings, Darius, dies just before he was to lead his army to crush the rebellion in Egypt. Enter his son and heir, Xerxes, who takes the throne and immediately orders the deaths of many of his brothers, so that there could be no other rival for his power. Xerxes is determined to become the greatest Persian king in history, and so he leads his army and ruthlessly crushes the revolt in Egypt. Tens of thousands are slain, and hundreds of thousands are sold into slavery. The news of the truly brutal suppression of the rebellion spreads across the world as a lesson to any other would-be rebels. Then his eyes turn towards Greece. To punish Athens for delivering the humiliating defeat at Marathon a decade before. Xerxes already has the largest standing army in the world, but he orders conscripts to be raised from every province in his vast empire. Units begin to pour into Anatolia, modern Turkey, from as far away as India to what is now Libya. Rumors of this assembling horde soon reach the cities of Greece, causing fear.
Phobos.
Xerxes orders the construction of the largest navy the world had ever known, with over 1,200 ships. And once completed, he sends the fleet out into the Aegean Sea and conquers all the island nations surrounding Greece. Macedon and Thrace, directly to the north of Greece, renew their allegiance to the Persian throne. And cut off, an eerie silence, a shroud of darkness begins to surround mainland Greece. Fear.
Phobos.
Xerxes dispatches hundreds of ambassadors to the cities of Greece, demanding the traditional tokens of submission, a pot of their soil, and a pot of their water. Notably, he does not send ambassadors to Athens or Sparta, as they had killed the ambassadors his father had sent, and Athens was the target of his vengeance. He had sworn to carry out his father's will and burn the city to the ground, destroy its temples, and kill or enslave its population. First a few, then a flood of Greek cities pledged their allegiance to Persia. Fear.
Phobos.
In his early 50s, Leonidas ascends to the throne. Being a third son, he had never thought to rule. As such, he had gone through the trials of the Agoge and was a warrior and commander. He, like all Spartans, was extremely pious. So with the looming Persian threat, he seeks the advice of Apollo. He sends word to the oracle at Delphi, the premier conduit to the god, to receive guidance, and receives the reply, "For you, inhabitants of wide-wayed Sparta, either your great and glorious city must be wasted by Persian men, or if not that, then the bounds of Sparta must mourn a dead king from the line of Hercules." Meaning a king must die in battle, or Sparta would fall. Fear.
Phobos.
With the Persian invasion imminent, in 481, 1 year before the Battle of Thermopylae, the desperate cities of Greece call for a meeting in Corinth. Of 700 cities on the mainland, only 70 attend. The rest determined to remain neutral or have already submitted to Persian rule. The attendees argue over the best course of action. Should they submit as a group, attempt to fight, seek other allies from the Greek colonies in Sicily? In the end, they decide to resist, with Sparta in overall command. Of the 70 cities that attended the meeting, only 30 joined the alliance. Fear.
Phobos.
The Greeks dispatch a powerful army of over 10,000 hoplites to the plain of Tempe, in the shadow of Mount Olympus, in the far north, in Thessaly. They are met by a large contingent of Thessalian cavalry, only to be told that there are numerous ways for the Persians to march around the plain and surround the Greek army. They are forced to withdraw, and unable to stand alone, Thessaly submits to Persian rule, adding their forces to the approaching horde. Fear.
Phobos.
According to Herodotus, the father of Western history, Xerxes' army was 2.5 million men strong. This number is quite frankly impossible. However, from recent archaeological digs that discovered the supply dumps that Xerxes had set up in advance of his march, his army was at least 200,000 men strong. When combined with his navy, we are talking about 250,000 soldiers and marines. It was the largest combined force the world had ever known. Xerxes orders his engineers to construct a mile-long bridge of ships covered with earth and wood so his army can cross the Hellespont, also called the Dardanelles, the narrow strip of water that separates Europe from Asia. A storm ruins the first bridge, so the God King has the water beaten with chains heated in the holy flames of the sun god Ahura Mazda, and then thrown deep into the water to subdue Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. This works, the weather clears, and as soon as the second bridge is completed, his colossal army crosses, determined to vanquish the rabble of Greek cities that stood against them and burn Athens to the ground. The Battle of Thermopylae begins after this. I hope you are enjoying this experience we share. I know I enjoy creating them for you, and I could really use your help to keep the lights on, if you will. Please go to patreon.com/deepintohistory and pledge your support. You'll gain access to my ever-growing library of Patreon-exclusive tales, and later this month, be the first to experience the epic tie-in versus Reform. After the catastrophic Battle of Arausio, the Republic of Rome is on its knees. But then, Speas,
Hope.
when the heroes of the African legions return, the eagles of Jupiter, and so seductive, meet and mingle as we experience the politics, the passion, the fear, the love, the hatred, the divisions. In the late Republic's most desperate hour, the Marian reforms, like you've never, ever experienced them before on any medium. When Versus, the saga of how the Republic fell to the Empire, continues this month, available first on Patreon and Spotify. Now back to The Gates of Hell. The news of the approach of Xerxes and his army sent alarm across all the free cities of Greece. Worse news arrived when it was learned that the Persian King of Kings was being advised by Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king, who was giving his new liege information about the lay of the land and the tactics the Greeks would use against him. In the ancient world, this kind of first-hand knowledge was extraordinarily valuable, and for this, Xerxes vowed to reward the exile by making him his satrap, overlord of all of Greece. During this time, there was a constant flurry of couriers running between Athens and Sparta, with messages to coordinate a defense of Greece. Many cities allied to Sparta, along with many Spartan citizens, desired to fortify the narrow isthmus of Corinth, thus sealing off Sparta from the rest of Greece. The Athenians responded to this by warning the Spartans that if they sealed themselves off from their allies on the central mainland, they would abandon their city and sail away to the colonies in Magna Graecia, southern Italy. Without the Athenian navy, the Persian fleet could sail past the isthmus and land troops near the heart of the Peloponnese and attack several cities at once. They would be cut off, surrounded, and surely be vanquished. King Leonidas of Sparta reached a compromise. He would lead a small but powerful force to a narrow pass in the far north of Greece. If the pass proved defensible, another larger army could come to reinforce the position. Meanwhile, the Athenian navy would be nearby at sea to prevent the Persian navy from landing troops behind the defenders at the pass. By strange coincidence, this was the time of the Carneia, the same spiritual festival which had prevented the Spartans from marching to Marathon 10 years before. During this festival, it was forbidden for the Spartan army to fight. Even with the dire situation, the ephors refused to allow the army to march. Now, each of the two Spartan kings was entitled to a bodyguard of 300 men whenever they moved abroad. So Leonidas used this technicality to handpick which warriors would accompany him. He insisted that every man who marched with him be a father to at least one boy, so that their family line would continue if they fell in battle. With the prophecy that a Spartan king must die in order to save his city continually in his thoughts, It seems clear that he at least felt that he would not live to see Sparta again. We should understand the level of esteem and respect that Leonidas was held in by his men. Unlike other Spartan kings, he had survived the rigors of the agoge. Growing up and serving with all of them, he had led them in battle many times. And though aged 60, he was still a formidable warrior and a gifted strategist. He had fought in the front lines and bled for his city. His warriors loved him and would follow him anywhere. The 300 did not leave Sparta alone. Each would have been accompanied by his battle helot slave. These squires would tend to their warriors' equipment, bring men in combat water, tend to wounds, and many wielded ranged weapons such as short bows and light javelins, which they would fire at the enemy if a gap opened in the lines. As the Spartans marched through Greece to get to the mountain pass, they are joined by contingents from many different cities, so that when they arrive, they are a mixed army of between 5,000 to 7,000 hoplites. It should be noted that all of these men fought in the same classic Greek phalanx, though none were full-time professional soldiers like the Spartans. The pass of Thermopylae in northern Greece was narrow. Sources differ on exactly how narrow, but roughly 50 to 100 meters at the very most. On the west side of the pass rose Mount Calidronum, sacred to Hercules.
Hercules, hero of song and story.
With steep and impassable wooded inclines. On the east side, it sharply sloped down to a thin stretch of impassable marshland, and then the sea. Thermopylae translates as hot gates. The reason it was given this name was first, there were thermal hot springs nearby where the ancients would bathe, believing in the curative properties of the holy waters. Second, this pass was often used as an invasion route, as it was the path to the Greek heartland from the north. So there were 3 short walls built across the path at its narrowest point, which were called pili, or gates. The hot springs and the gates came to give this strange place its name, Thermopylae. This was a perfect position for the Greeks to defend, because it would negate the Persian numbers, and the narrow strait just offshore could be blocked by the Athenian navy with relative ease, and again negate the Persian fleet's vast numerical superiority. It should also be said that this was the absolute best position for a phalanx to hold, as it was designed for full frontal combat. The Persians would have to break through a solid wall of bronze-clad hoplites, with many thousands behind ready to take their place. In addition, it robbed Xerxes' army of one of its primary weapons, because his vaunted and excellent cavalry would be useless in the pass. Upon arriving at Thermopylae, Leonidas finds that the walls are in disrepair and immediately orders them fixed. Locals inform him that there is a little-known goat trail running through the mountain that, if discovered by the enemy, would allow them to send men on a long route that would have them emerge well beyond the pass and cut off the Greek army. This trail was very narrow. In some places, only one man at a time could advance through it. Still, if the Greeks were surrounded, they would be crushed. To prevent this, Leonidas decides to send the 1,000-strong contingent that had joined the army from the nearby city of Phocis deep into the mountains and hold the goat trail in case the Persians discovered it. After 2 days of preparing the pass and coordinating with the Athenian fleet just offshore, the forward elements of Xerxes' army came into view. It is impossible to say what must have been going through the minds of the Greeks at the pass. They would have seen dozens of contingents, very different from each other. Remember, Xerxes' army consisted of units from all across his vast empire. There would have been lightly clad African spearmen from the south of Egypt, Scythian cavalry, archers from Bactria, and many other units. And of course, the armored fist of the King of Kings himself, the Immortals, so called because they always numbered 10,000 warriors. If one fell in battle, another was promoted to take his place. Another sight that would have shocked the Greeks, and we will never see, is upwards of 80,000 horses. The Persians excelled at deploying cavalry in vast numbers on the wide open plains of the east. This army spoke dozens of different languages, hundreds of different dialects. The task of communicating orders alone would have been a massive undertaking. This army was by design one that needed a lot of room for complex maneuvers performed quickly. It was an army built for speed and ranged warfare, whereas the Greeks, particularly the Spartans, saw ranged weapons as effeminate, not worthy of a citizen. In the case of the Spartans, only select battle helots were equipped with them. These were two nearly opposite styles of warfare. The Persians were used to showering their foes with a prolonged rain of arrows, and then sending in their cavalry and lightly armored infantry using wicker shields to rush in and finish the enemy before they could reform their ranks. It was about speed and timing. They were primarily used to fighting lightly armored enemies that were especially vulnerable to missile fire. The Greeks fought in a densely packed phalanx, in heavy bronze armor, with wood and bronze shields large enough to cover the men next to them. This formation made the Greeks nearly impervious to arrow fire, and the narrow pass at Thermopylae rendered the Persian cavalry nearly useless. Still, the sheer numbers and completely alien peoples coming to meet them in battle would have been intimidating to say the least. It took another 4 days for Xerxes' entire army to arrive. All the while, there would have been a dust cloud kicked up by men and animals filling the sky to the north of the Greeks, masking the full extent of the Persian army, and appearing like a continual localized natural disaster. During this time, supplies from nearby allied cities were arriving at the pass. The Spartans trained and oiled their bodies as they would any day. They drilled with their allies, improving their techniques and giving them heart and courage. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, Xerxes expected the Greeks to be in a state of panic, not calmly going through their drills and routines. The Persian scouts who reported this found it unnerving, for the Spartans were unlike any foe they had faced before. This is also the time where we get some of the great quotes attributed to the Spartans. Upon seeing the vast numbers of archers in the Persian army, a Greek soldier complained, "With the arrows of the barbarians, it will be impossible to see the sun." Dinakes, a Spartan warrior, replied, "Won't it be nice then, if we have shade in which to fight them?" Xerxes sent an emissary to the pass, offering the Greeks peace and the title Friends of the Persian people, with places of high honor in his army and the opportunity to move their people to much richer lands. Leonidas refused. The emissary later returned with a written message from Xerxes himself, asking the Greeks to hand over their arms. Leonidas replied, "Molon labe," which means, "Come and take them." With the peace overtures rebuffed, all knew battle was imminent. On the morning of the 5th day, Xerxes ordered the attack to begin. It took time for his generals to organize his army, and for them to form into blocks of men that could file up the narrow path, which led to the even narrower pass. In the meantime, a nearby hill was cleared of trees, and the high pyramidal throne of the King of Kings carried to the spot by the 100 slaves it took to move it. The king ascended the 50 steps and took his seat to watch his magnificent army crush this Greek rabble. From his lofty perch, he could see most of the battlefield, well into the pass, definitely as far as the second wall. Xerxes gave the order for the battle to begin, and at the base of his throne, trumpets blared. First came a massed block of 5,000 archers. They stopped 100 yards away from the Greeks and opened fire. With relentless volleys of cane arrows with iron tips, the allied Greek phalanx presented a solid wall of raised shields and bronze armor. The continuous rain of arrows must have indeed offered the Greek shade, locked together in the phalanx. The arrows had little effect, nearly all bouncing harmlessly off shields. After an hour, Xerxes ordered his archers to cease fire, and then ordered the Mede and Sicyan infantry to attack. They advanced in a block of 10,000 men. At 20 yards from the Greeks, they let out an ululating war cry and charged the allied phalanx, which had compacted and withdrawn to fight in the front of the Phocian wall, the narrowest part of the pass. This nearly completely negated the Persians' numerical advantage, and when the lightly armored Medes made contact with the solid phalanx, they were slaughtered. The weight of their comrades coming from behind practically pushed warriors in front onto Greek spear points. The Medes, excellent in the open plain-style warfare of the East, were exceptional warriors, but not in the pass of Thermopylae. They were massacred, completely unequipped to fight a phalanx. Their light armor, which served well against arrows, was next to useless against Greek spears. It is said that Xerxes jumped to his feet 3 times in fear for his army. The allied Greeks rotated in and out of combat, so the Persian army was always facing relatively fresh troops, all except the Spartans, who Leonidas held in reserve as his army's shock unit. After Xerxes withdrew his decimated Medes and then the shattered Scythians, he decided he had had enough of this and ordered in his best troops, his immortals, to take the pass. When the Greeks saw the 10,000 glorious warriors, the cream of Persian chivalry, march up the trail to the pass, Leonidas decided that it was time. He led the Spartans, his 300 bodyguards himself. Now I could just tell you what happened, and I would no doubt do so ever so suavely. But this is deep into history, and you're with your friend and lore master Arjun. So you know we are going to experience it. Prepare to go to war with the 300. As we become one with King Leonidas of Sparta's battle helot, Neodromos, stationed just to the rear of the Spartan phalanx as it faces its ultimate test, King Xerxes' immortals. So come dream with me, because the event at the Battle of Thermopylae in the late summer of 480 before the Common Era might have gone something like this. Ready?
Yeah, I think I'm ready.
Then let's go. You are walking mere feet behind the Spartan phalanx as it approaches the front for the first time since this battle began. In front of you, the Spartans are marching in formation, spears held upright and shields held loosely, without their crimson cloaks, which marked them as ready for war. Though always kept clean, Leonidas had ordered that every Spartan's shield and armor, chestplate, helmet, and greaves be polished to a gleaming sheen, so that to the foe, it would look like they were facing demigods, like Hercules, to whom the very ground upon which you walked was sacred. The thought of Hercules brings your eyes to the king in the center of the front rank of the advancing phalanx. For the blood of Hercules flowed in his veins. He wears no adornments. He is armored exactly like every other Spartan. You had been together since the age of 7, when you were assigned to train as his helot in the Agoge. You have boxed, and as a result knocked one another unconscious countless times. As a youth you had been tall and lanky, and at age 60 you still were. Your victory against the king had come early, for once Leonidas grew to full manhood, no man could stand against him in the boxing ring. When Leonidas trained in the phalanx, you had trained to be a squire. At first in a support role, such as delivering water or fresh spears to the Spartans. When your speed and accuracy with javelins was noticed, you were trained as a battle helot, a ranged warrior that focused on protecting its master. Through countless hours of practice and the dozens of battles you had fought together, you have achieved an unmatched synergy. In battle, you watch and wait, and when you see Leonidas' arm tire, you fling your javelins with deadly accuracy in the gaps left by his resting spear. If his spear broke in battle, your sharpened javelins hold the line for him while he's re-equipped. For you are Neodromos, who the Spartans lovingly and with reverence refer to as Neo, a nickname Leonidas had given you when you first met as children. Beyond the Agoge, you had saved Leonidas' life countless times, and even had the honor of fighting with him as a dais, 2 warriors fighting back to back, each responsible for 180 degrees around you. The phalanx had broken, and the battle had become a general melee. Though you only wore light leather armor, you had withstood and subsequently decimated bronze-armored Argive hoplites with nothing but a javelin in each hand, which you wielded as very short stabbing spears. You were both 22 on that day, and though you were a trained battle helot and thus could never be made a free man, Leonidas had freed your wife and sons and given them a large plot of land to work for themselves. Though your master forever, Leonidas is your friend because during the trials of the Agoge, you had huddled together for warmth at night and wept tears of despair. Through the hellfire of countless battles, you have become brothers, closer than brothers. As you climb over the second wall in the narrow pass, a helot begins to play a flute. whose song sets the pace for the marching Spartans. The ground beneath your sandaled feet is no longer simple dirt. With each step, it is becoming darker and thicker and begins to stink. You realize that you are on the fringes of a quagmire of blood, piss, and bile, which the light soil of the past cannot absorb quickly enough. You are walking on the grounds of hell. As you near the narrowest part of the pass, the flute stops, and in unison, so too do the Spartans. Perhaps 100 feet beyond the second gate, the Phocian wall. Ahead of you, you can't see past a hill that was not there before. You study it closely and realize it is a hill of corpses. And as you look closer, you see badly wounded men struggling within it. It is a writhing and disgusting mass of dead and dying Persians that had tried to take the pass all morning. Thousands of men were in that pile. It must have been a dozen paces wide and in places 12 feet high. This mountain of humanity is the source of the rivers of bile that are soaking your feet. The mountain even has its own wildlife, as it is covered with clouds of insects, and the sky beyond are hundreds of vultures and carrion crows circling. There is an almost eerie silence as you stand and wait. Then a long, low horn blast from the distance in front of you can only mean that the Immortals, Xerxes' elite troops, are advancing to meet the Spartans. You hear ululating war cries from unseen men not far away. And the Spartans lock their shield together and lower their spears. The phalanx formed. The vile black muck beneath your feet begins to vibrate slightly as you see helmets begin to peek above the crest of the bloody hill. First a few, then dozens, and now hundreds of Immortals are cresting and then descending the gruesome mountain. The men you see are beautifully armored in gold mail that looks like fish scales, each carrying a large rectangular wicker shield in one hand and a short 5-foot spear in the other. Their formation, if they had one, was completely broken by the obstacle. With a new series of war cries, the Immortals charged the Spartan phalanx, with a continual flow of hundreds more streaming over the bloody hill. As the first few dozen Immortals reach the line, the Spartans are silent and begin methodically stabbing out with their long spears, each man only concerned with the area directly in front of him, as they know their shield brothers on either side, and the men behind will not allow them to be attacked from any other direction. It immediately becomes apparent that the Immortals are completely ill-equipped to face the solid wall of bronze containing the greatest warriors in Greece. Their wicker shields, perfect for catching arrows, are near useless against Spartan spears. Their delicate mail cannot stop the razor-sharp spearheads, and their shorter weapons have no chance of reaching their targets before they are brought down. Your full focus is on Leonidas in the front rank. He is immediately surrounded in the phalanx by 21 Olympic champions, Spartan knights, his bodyguard within the 300 bodyguards. After long minutes, your keen and focused eyes notice that his spear thrusts are slowing slightly. He needs a chance to catch his breath. You pull a few javelins from the quiver on your back and begin hurling them with deadly accuracy just over the phalanx and into the Persian warriors attempting to attack the king. You bring down 2 men, and then a third, who, though clearly dead, doesn't fall because of the crush of his many thousands of comrades coming from behind. It proves just enough time for the king to catch his breath, and he resumes attacking with full force. The press at the front of the phalanx is becoming crushing. The Spartans in the rear ranks are pushing with all their might, their shields on the backs of the men in front of them to brace the line. Still, because of the slick gore-strewn mud on the ground and the tremendous counterweight of thousands of Immortals, the phalanx is beginning to slide backwards, only inches at a time, but this could prove disastrous if it broke the shield wall. You hear a sharp and piercing flute note repeated twice, the signal for you and the other battle helots to run back to the Phocian wall. Without thinking, you and your comrades turn, sprint, and mount the wall. Then, just as planned, the Spartans turn as one and run back towards you. You hear yells of triumph from the Immortals. who, believing victory was theirs, break ranks to chase down the fleeing Spartans. 25 feet from the wall, the Spartans turn and flawlessly reform the phalanx and begin to march forward at a half step, stabbing their disorganized pursuers as they moved. The immortals are slaughtered, and the press of many thousands from behind drive more and more onto the spears of the phalanx, and death.
Day 2.
Of the Battle of Thermopylae. It is just after noon, and you again stand behind the Spartans, though this time they are forced to thin their ranks and man the Phocian wall. On the previous day, the Persians had been simply decimated by the combined Greek force, each contingent completely outclassed by the armored hoplites in the narrow confines of the pass. From the massive piles of now rotting bodies you had seen, you estimate that at the very least 10,000 of them were slain yesterday. The combined losses for the Greek army were only 3 men killed, though many were badly wounded. All morning you had rotated in and out of combat with the Spartans. Today's Xerxes, perhaps no longer willing to use his best troops, was sending in his conscript units from all over his vast empire. You have fought Indians, Bactrians, and were now locked in combat with Ethiopian plainsmen wielding long curved swords. Many of these units, upon seeing the grisly hills of flesh they would have to climb over just to reach the battle at the middle of the pass, had hesitated, so their officers stood behind and whipped their backs until they moved forward. The hill of dead bodies directly in front of the Phocian wall is serving as a ramp for the advancing enemy. In places, it is much higher than the 6-foot wall. The men climbing it and the thousands pushing them forward from behind cause the hideous mount to move and slide forward at times. You hear a sickening wet sound as 2 of the more enormous peaks break and slide forward onto the Spartans. An avalanche of dead men, a body slide. At least a dozen Spartans are buried beneath, and the phalanx is shattered. A flute is blown, and the Spartans rush back 50 feet, forsaking the battlement to reform the phalanx. Needing to be out of the rushing warriors' way, you turn your back and sprint. It is only when the formation is reformed that you see that Leonidas is missing. You desperately search the battlefield, and you see the king wielding his Xephos, his short sword and shield, trapped at the wall, locked in combat with the Africans and surely about to be surrounded and cut down. Before you can even yell for help for your master, you see Polynices, the Olympic champion, sprinting towards him, but it's obvious he won't reach Leonidas in time to stop an Ethiopian warrior from rushing the king from his blind side. Without thinking, you draw the last of your javelins and launch it at the warrior with all your strength. It is your greatest throw, and perhaps your last, as you feel the muscle in your right shoulder burn as it tears. Resisting the urge to scream, you watch your javelin's flight as it takes the foreign warrior in his neck. Oh! You've saved Leonidas, at least for the next few seconds. Forward to Leonidas, orders a polemarch, a Spartan officer. The phalanx moves forward at full speed while maintaining its formation, but it's too slow for you. Your eyes are locked on your friend. He fights like a demigod, proving that he is indeed the blood of Heracles. Though only seconds pass, it feels like hours. As Polynices reaches him, he yells, "Dias!" and the 2 warriors fight back to back with Xephos and shield. The Ethiopian warriors are skilled with their swords, though most only wore cloth armor. The battle around the dais of king and knight becomes a twisted maze, but the 2 Spartans have the swifter blades. Their swords slice and cut in precise ways. They had trained since boyhood and knew the exact spots on the human body to strike to sever arteries, tendons, and find organs. They fought masterfully, and by the time they were enveloped by the relative safety of the phalanx, they had added a new foothill of slain men to the mountain range. In the distance, a loud low horn is blown, and the Ethiopians retreat. Exhausted, and with intense pain radiating from your shoulder, you rush to find Leonidas and find him sitting in the muck, breathing heavily and unable to rise. You hand him your water skin, from which he drinks deeply before he hands it back to you. You offer him your left hand to help him rise, which he takes, a grateful yet sad smile on his face. As you pull your master up to his feet, Your eyes meet, and he says,
We're getting too old for this, Neo.
You can't help but agree. Together, you walk back to the army camp at the rear, while another Greek contingent arrives to take the Spartans' place behind the Phocian wall.
Pause.
We'll come back to Neo in a moment. That long, low Persian horn blast that you just heard signaled the end of the Persian assault on the second day. It was early in the afternoon, and this mystified the Greeks, though they were no doubt happy to rest from the constant fighting. Out at sea, the Athenian navy had beaten back an equally vicious attack from the Persian fleet, and it seemed like Leonidas' plan would work, and that they could hold the pass indefinitely. The Greeks had no way of knowing that Xerxes had received a visitor, a man whose name would become synonymous with the word traitor in Greece forever after, Ephialtes. This Greek local shepherd told Xerxes about the goat trail through the mountain, which would lead his army well past the Greek war camp at Thermopylae and allow them to emerge in their rear and trap the army between two forces and be crushed. For this service, Ephialtes was given his weight in gold and promised vast lands once the conquest of Greece was complete. To exploit this fatal flaw in any defense of Thermopylae, Xerxes created a mixed force under the command of the officers of the Immortals, 20,000 strong, and sent them up the path into the mountains. The force marched the rest of the day and through the night. In the early morning, they came upon the 1,000 Phocian hoplites Leonidas had stationed in the mountain to guard the pass. Not professional soldiers, they had set no guard and were taken completely by surprise. They formed a phalanx in an open glade in the hills, but the Persians simply bypassed them. Keeping them pinned in place with a constant rain of arrows. History could have unfolded quite differently had Leonidas sent just one Spartan officer to take command of this force. For no Spartan would set a camp of that size without dozens of lookouts and patrols. In the end, the failed defenders of the goat trail did manage to send a single runner to warn Leonidas of the Persian flanking force.
Run, boy! Run like the wind!
When the king learned of the disaster, he ordered the contingents of the Greek army to retreat back to their various cities, and he committed himself and the Spartans to hold the pass for as long as they could in order to buy the retreat as much time as possible. Most left, but 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans refused to leave the Spartans alone. They, along with the Spartans' battle helots, stayed to face the enemy. The motives for remaining to fight were two. Practically, Leonidas needed to buy time to prevent the retreating allies from being ridden down by the vast number of Persian cavalry that would come pouring through the pass. Spiritually, remember the prophecy from the oracle at Delphi that either Sparta would lose a king in battle or their city would fall. Like all Spartans, Leonidas was a pious man and knew there was no better place to fulfill the prophecy and die so that Sparta could live than on ground sacred to his ancestor, the demigod Hercules. The Persians attacked in full force, and yet the Greeks held the pass, until the flanking force emerged in their rear and pushed them onto a small hillock, completely surrounded. The Greeks fought until every spear was shattered. Every sword and dagger broken, and finally with fists and teeth, King Leonidas fell dead, fulfilling his duty to his city and the gods, seeing the toll these fanatics were taking on his army. Xerxes ordered his archers to wipe them out.
Take aim!
We'll rejoin Neo on that hillock, cradling the dead king, his best friend and brother in arms.
Day 3
of the Battle of Thermopylae. Unnumbered tears flow down your face, and you look down into his. Leonidas is dead, and your heart is broken. He was the best man you ever knew. And with the battle for his body raging all around you, You knew you would never meet another like him. You are encircled by less than 20 Spartans and a few dozen men of Thebes, many of them fighting with just their fists after breaking their weapons in the morning's vicious fighting. From somewhere a horn is blown. And the cacophony of battle suddenly stops as the Persian infantry backs off. Then, after less than a minute, a hellish rain of arrows begins to fall. You feel like you have been punched in your chest, and you look down to see a Persian cane arrow lodged in the center of it. As you raise your head, desperate to look at the sky one last time, you roar your anguish to the gods. Then, everything around you has stopped. Men are frozen in place. There is no sound. And instead of the clear blue sky, you are looking into the face of a strange man. He has flawless bronze-colored skin, a blonde beard which shimmers with highlights of green, and the hair atop his head is intricately braided to look like the horns of a ram. You look into his eyes and become lost as you see eternity within them. This perfect being should be completely alien to you, yet you know him. For you were there to hear the Athenian courier Phidippides deliver his plea to the ephors in Sparta a decade ago. You had also heard of his strange encounter with this god in the mountains. Pan, you say, why didn't you help us? Why didn't you stop the Persians? Why did you let Leonidas die?
The fates decree what they will, but I was there with you. Did you not feel my presence at the hot gates? Think. You do, and recall the constant chaos and fear in the Persian ranks. The way the conscripts had to be whipped bloody to get them to move forward up the pass. Panic, yes, that was I.
He flips you a gold coin, which flies directly into your right hand, as if guided by some force.
For the ferryman,
he says nonchalantly. In horror, you realize that this could only mean one thing. You are passing into the afterlife. The coin would pay your way across the river Styx and into the depths of Hades.
Fear not, noble Neo. Leonidas eagerly awaits your arrival in Hades' halls. It was he who asked me to guide you to him.
He holds out his hand to help you rise, which you take, as a sense of utter calm and contentment comes over you at the thought of seeing Leonidas again. And as you pass onto what comes next, your body falls to the ground, a gentle smile on your lips. At least it might have gone like that. Surrounded, the Greeks left at the pass of Thermopylae died to the last man. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, in a fit of rage, Xerxes ordered that Leonidas' head be cut off, placed on a pike. He then had the dead king's body crucified. Though the Persians had won a path into Greece proper, the cost in lives had been very high. The Persians lost 20,000 dead and tens of thousands of wounded, to the Greeks 2,000. The tale of the epic last stand of the Spartans and their allies spread across Greece like wildfire. Their bravery, stubborn resistance, and sacrifice galvanized the opposition to Xerxes. With the pass lost, the Athenian navy sailed for home at desperate speed. For now, the way to Athens lay open, and the King of Kings' vengeance, as his huge army marched south. They resupplied from cities that had previously submitted to Persian rule, and sacked and burned all who had resisted them. When Xerxes reached Athens, he found the city empty, its people gone, except for a few fanatical priests who held the Acropolis. He kept his vow he had made upon his father Darius' death, and burned the city to the ground. Well off the coast, the Athenian navy guarded the small island of Salamis, where they had moved the entire population. The Athenian leader Themistocles and his people wept for this city as it burned, its flames turning night to day. He had a plan, though, for he had received a prophecy of his own. After the war, the Spartans marched to the pass at Thermopylae to bury their dead, and honor their fallen. On a rock in the past, they carved a poem, a saying if you will. It read, "Tell the Spartan stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Thank you for listening to Deep into History. I hope you enjoyed The Gates of Hell. This experience we share is produced by York Campbell from Poetic Earthling Studio, and the introduction is performed by Shante, who you can find at ctamarketing.biz. To support the show for just cents a day, please go to patreon.com/deepintohistory or directly on Spotify. After listening, please tell at least one person you know about the show. You can follow me at Deep Into History on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and Threads to get your daily blast from the past. And as always, my dear friend, take care of yourself. I truly look forward to the next time we go deep.
Thank you for listening to Deep into History.